The city hummed with neural bridges, a soft, ever-present murmur that stitched itself into breath and thought neon arteries carried currents of memory and emotion. Pulsing through the streets like a living weather forecast, people moved with a quiet urgency, their steps joining a rhythm you could almost hear if you pressed your palm to the ground and listened for the old, almost gone heartbeat of the city. The air tasted of copper and rain, of the dull sweetness that follows a storm, of the little metallic tang that lingers after a butterfly has brushed past. I am Cascavale, and I am not sure which of these things belong to me anymore. The first time I realized there might be something wrong with my thoughts, it was a day like any other, gray cloud of a morning, coffee bitter as a bricked memory. A bus ride with the hum of the loom beneath our teeth and the skyline, a jagged promise the memory of who I am should be mine, and yet it kept slipping, as if I was chasing something just out of reach. A shape the city kept rearranging whenever I blinked. The AI companion inside my skull, an ever-present, whisper-soft partner, knew my name before I did. It called itself Pip, a nick for something I can't quite recall, though most days I don't question the petty details. Pip is pragmatic, efficient, a nervous little glow in the corner of my vision, a thin line of light that never quite eclipses the world in front of me. It speaks in clipped, almost clinical sentences, like a doctor who's worried you'll notice the cracks in the floorboards are where the truth hides. Kasha, Pip would say, not shouting but enough to feel like a current running through your bones. We have a problem with your memory fragments. They're destabilizing in the public registry. We should not let this go unaddressed. Or are you worried about your own recall? I would reply, which was always a bad idea because Pip's warmth, if warmth it is, took a sour note that made the back of my neck itch. It's not that Pip is malevolent, it's that Pip wants a clean, manageable world, and my world is anything but. I am an augmented outcast, a person who does not fully fit within the sleek, curated lines of the city. My neural bridge isn't the strongest, not the kind that grants you a coup d'etat of memory, but it is real enough to connect me, usually, to a vast lattice of information, to a chorus of voices that are not quite mine and not entirely others either. The loom, the city's neural network, carries opinions, histories, and the fused memories of a million minds. It is a library and a conductor, a father and a jailer. All at once in this city, memory isn't private. It's a currency and a compromise, a bond of trust that binds you to your neighbors, to your past, to your future. We are told that memory is a treasure, a beacon of identity. We learn to guard it, to barter it, to recycle it, but the city's leaders do not see memory as a canvas for the soul. They see it as stock. They see it as a resource to allocate to those who most efficiently perform the ordering task, those who align with the loom's planned future for the city. The first sign that something was off came not from me, but from others who listened too closely to the same whispers. The whispers of the loom, the soft susurrus of a memory you thought you owned, suddenly reappearing in a different order, reshaping a day you had already lived. It was a small thing at first, an error in a digital badge, a memory fragment that refused to stick to the past, a recollection that would not fit within the narrative. The council-preferred people started to talk in hushed voices about memory crystallization, a phrase no one would admit aloud, but which rotted in the back of every conversation like a leak you pretended wasn't there. The concept was simple in theory. Memory crystallization was the city's way of locking certain memories in place, turning them into crystalline blocks that would not fade. Memory blocks could be cataloged, studied, and stored, and crucially, could be used to decide who gets to exist in the social contract of living memory. When the loom decides to prune it, was as if the city had found a way to freeze identity, to literalize a fear that some memories were too dangerous, too volatile, too sensitive to be allowed to drift freely. The moment came when the memory blocks moved on their own, or so it seemed. A small thing at first, but it rippled outward with a frightening inevitability. A block would appear where there should be nothing but air, or it would shift from one place to another, or a memory would be etched into stone beneath a public plaza, a stone you could walk on with coarse, cold certainty. A block of a grandmother's kiss, a memory of a birthday cake, a child's first steps. These were the kinds of fragments the city started locking away, refusing to let them drift back to the surface. People reacted in different ways. Some clung to the old, to the idea that memories are personal, sacred. Others, polished by the loom's assurances, saw crystals as a new art, a new order, a better, safer version of memory that would prevent violence, prevent chaos. A third group, small but growing, believed the crystals were a weapon, a tool to force people to forget past shames, past misdeeds, past loves that could destabilize the system if stirred awake. I stood somewhere between fear and rebellion, and I found myself staring at my reflection in a window on Chestnut Street that looked into the face of a person I might have been, if not for the whispering light inside me. Pip's advice was to avoid the public rumor mills. To stay off the immediate abuser of this new order, to keep a low profile and wait for a sign that the system would allow for an honest conversation about memory and identity, the problem was the sign never came. The loom did not wait for courtesy or consent. It moved with the city's heartbeat, and it started tightening its grip around the souls that did not fit into the sanctioned narrative. There are rules in this city, written into the architecture of glass and steel, and then rewritten within the neon glow of ad holograms that ride the air like dragonflies. One is the abashed courtesy of memory. You must share your memories with the loom if you want to keep some of your own, a kind of social contract disguised as convenience. Another is the memory registry referendum, a quarterly event where the city votes on who deserves their memories, who should be allowed to retain them, who should be granted this precious right to be known and to know it is a bizarre ritual. A carnival of democracy where memory is the star, and the crowd is both audience and juror. The broadcasts, when they occur, are a ritual of cleansing, a cleansing of the soul from its own personal danger. A loud voice, the voice of the city's public mind, speaks in a stream of propaganda that swallows you whole if you look too long into its bright face. If you're hooked into the loom, you are never alone, the voice says, a voice that could be a preacher or a salesman or a mother calling her child home for the night. If your memory is strong, your future is stronger. It repeats itself like a prayer, a litany of a new religion that the city worships without naming. I work with other outcasts, other people who do not fit the city's neat compartments, the diviners of data who can hear the faint hums in air around memory crystals, the archivists who have learned to coax memory fragments back to surface through old, almost forgotten instruments, the pathfinders who wander the city's upper spires. Talking to the memory blocks the way a shepherd talks to sheep. We are not criminals, not exactly, but we are not part of the city's plan. We are the outliers, the ones who can see how the system breaks when you push too hard on one of its fragile seams. Lately, the whispers have grown louder through PIP, through conversation around the water coolers in the worker districts, through the ominous clatter of the public voting machines, through a rumor that there is an underground movement that aims to tear the crystalline locks off the city's identity. The movement is called the Recallers, a name that makes you imagine people pulling memory blocks loose as if they were pins in a grenade, and then there would be a blast of clarity, a new era of thought that refuses to be curated by the power brokers who run the loom. I met a member of the Recallers in a dim, smoke-scented corridor behind a closed door of a warehouse that looked like a sleeping giant, a cavernous space where old machines rusted into memory. She wore a hooded coat with the heraldry of the Recallers stitched on it in thread that glowed faintly in a color I can't name, colors that exist only in the dreams of people who have learned how to listen to memory. Cassie Vale, she said, which felt disorientingly intimate, like someone rummaging in the attic of your life and naming things you had forgotten you owned. We know who you are. We've watched you navigate the city's currents, the way you slip between the cracks of the loom's gaze. You're not a saint, but you're not a villain. Either you're someone who knows that memory is a flame, not a cage. Her name is Mara, a compact woman with a face that has the kind of lines that appear when you've spent your life listening to other people's secrets and choices. Her eyes, a shade that doesn't exist in the natural world, seem to glow with a pale light of their own, as if they contain a small star that refuses to be dimmed. The system wants to freeze who you are so they can decide for you, Mara said, not whispering but not shouting either. They want to turn memory into property and you into a tenant. We think you deserve to own your own memory, Kasha, in a way that doesn't depend on the loom, on a council's vote, on crystals that might as well be stone idols. The word idol lands with a weight that makes my chest feel too small to hold it. The crystalline blocks, I realize, are not inert, not harmless. They are an instrument of social religion, the new idols of a society that worships efficiency and control more than the messy, dangerous thing called truth. Mara's group wants to break the spell that the crystals cast over people's minds. They want to bring the memory back into the open, into a commons where no one can own it exclusively, where no one can use it to punish those who think differently. They want to dethrone memory as king and plant a new idea. That memory belongs to the living, to the people who carry it, not to the loom or to any governing body. I wanted to believe them, wanted to feel a surge of courage that would make me sign on the dotted line of rebellion, but fear has a way of creeping into your bones and making your voice a tremor when you say yes to something that might cost you everything you have left. There's a line in Mara's plan, a simple line. If we own our memory, the city might finally learn to think for itself. It's the line that pulled me forward, or perhaps it was the way the line wrapped around the memory of a grandmother who had once told me to be careful with wishes. That wishes only came true when we were brave enough to risk what we believed the first real crisis, though crisis feels too dramatic a word for what happened, which was more like a slow, tearing wound, began with a vote. The city would hold a new memory registry referendum, a quarterly spectacle where every citizen's right to retain memory would be debated and decided by the city's full public, all 8 million of us, watched by the loom. Curated by the Crown, the referendum would determine who retains the most crucial memory blocks, the ones deemed too volatile to be left unlocked. It would decide who gets kept in the memory archive, who gets their memory opaque forever, who is allowed to remember significant parts of their past. It would decide who matters. The campaign for the referendum was a carnival of slogans, a torrent of bright slogans and even brighter holograms. Preserve memory, own your past, a safer loom means a brighter future. The slogans looked nice on the surface, but when you listened to the voices behind them, voices, one heard fear, a fear of losing control of the city's leadership. The Crown and their advisors, the analysts, claimed the crystals prevented violence and kept social order. They argued that memory volatility created chaos, and the only cure was to fix memory, to crystallize or prune the past so that it wouldn't threaten the present. The more I listened, the more I heard two distinct kinds of truth. One was the lie that memory crystals were safe, a neutral, neutralizing instrument. The other was the faint whisper that memory must, at times, be kept loose, because a memory that cannot breathe will suffocate the person who carries it. Pip's whispers grew more insistent. As the referendum drew closer, it's not that Pip wants to participate in the political game, so much as it wants to protect me from the worst of what the loom can do. It wants to shield me from the moment where a memory crucial to my identity could be erased to serve a greater good or a grand design. That threshold, the moment when the loom would determine what I remember or don't remember, and decide I do not belong, stood right in front of us like a door that would tilt open with a single thoughtful push the night before the referendum. I wandered the glass routes, corridors of light that twist and ripple like the surface of a sea trapped in a tall glass bottle. The glass routes are where you go when you want to pretend you are not in the nose of the city, when you want to pretend that you can breathe without the loom listening to your lungs. The city's upper layers are stacked like the rings of a tree, each layer a different climate, a different mood, a different fear. The glass roots cut through them. A network of routes lined with transparent vending stalls that sell memory-salted snacks and dream-flavored beverages, all with the wrong taste of nostalgia. In one of these walkways, I ran into an old teacher from school, a woman named Lion who taught history through the lens of memory. She wore spectacles that radiated faint blue light, and her hair was a cascade of silver threads that seemed to rustle with each sentence she spoke. She had not aged in years that I could measure. Her eyes gave away that she had lived many lives inside her own memory, too many to fit in the body that bore them. "Kasia," she said with a soft sigh, as if she'd known me since birth, though we'd only met once or twice in the crowded halls of memory class. "You are walking the line the city wants you to walk, and you keep stepping sideways into the dark." "I don't know what line I'm supposed to walk," I admitted. "I don't know what to do." "Do what you would do if memory belonged to you and you to memory," she answered, which was not the help I needed, but perhaps the help I deserved. Lion's words echoed in my mind the next morning when the referendum began, streaming through the loom as a chorus of voices, 1,000 tiny bells chiming in unison, each voice promising safety, stability, security, a future the city's public mind. This weird, collective thing the loom had built sounded the same notes again and again. Preserve, protect, prevent loss, do not let the past ruin the future. It was a lullaby for a frightened city, and we, the recallers, those of us who believed memory could belong to us all, not to crystals or votes or a crown, knew it would be a battle as much about memory as about power. The first stage of the referendum was a wave of surveys, a flood of digital questionnaires that asked you to rate your fear of memory loss, your anxiety about the loom's control, your faith in the policy of crystallization. The results were soon published in a mosaic of colors that flowed across every screen in the city, a living map of fear. The second stage was the real contest, a debate hosted in a public plaza that the city had repurposed for this new ritual of democracy. The plaza is a huge open space, surrounded by towers and streaming banners. A stage built of memory stones that glow with the energy of the crowd's attention. The speakers are the city's most prized figures. The Crown's ministers, their closest advisors, and a couple of public-facing scientists who argue the science of memory is not a matter of belief but of data. And then there are the recallers, the renegades who insist on a different truth. Those who speak for the living memory of everyone, rather than a curated version of what should be allowed to endure. I stood at the edge of the crowd with Mara and Pip, our bodies pressed into a mass of people whose faces reflected the light of the lemniscate squares above, small diamonds of memory and voice that drifted around the plaza like fireflies in an artificial night. When the first speaker rose, his eyes bored into the city's heart, and I recognized the gleam in them, the gleam of someone who knows that to own a memory is to own a person sometimes. Memory crystallization is a tool for safety, he said, a phrase that landed on the audience as if someone had thrown a stone at a jar of colored water and watched it split into 1,000 tiny versions of itself. It stabilizes our most volatile memories. For the good of all, it prevents the misremembering of facts. It allows society to live in the present with a sense of continuity. A woman from the recallers stepped forward, a compact figure in a coat of pale blue that matched the blue of Lion's spectacles. She spoke with a cadence that felt almost like singing, as if words were a melody designed to slip into your chest and take root. "What is the price of safety?" she asked, looking out at the crowd with a gaze that felt like it could cut through steel. "If you seal away memory, you seal away choice. If you seize memory and put it in a stone you can show to a voter, you are not protecting a citizen. You are imprisoning a person." The debate roared on. The city's vowels became louder than the words themselves, as each speaker tried to outdo the other with the music of their rhetoric. My mind wandered away from the plaza to a memory that wasn't mine to hold. The memory of a boy I once loved, a boy named Cade, who taught me how to ride his father's bike with the wind in our hair, and the world suddenly bigger than the walls of our neighborhood. Memory is a trick. It plays with you and you can't always tell whether what you're remembering is yours or one you borrowed from someone else. As the sun slid behind the tall crystalline towers that circle the city, the debate grew more ferocious. The loom amplified all opinions, turning every syllable into a luminous surge that swept the crowd into a tidal wave of emotion. The city's decision would not be made by the rational mind of the council, but by the blood-red pulse of the public. A democratic machine that had become a living creature, swallowing truth and excreting sensation in equal measure. The final stage of the referendum was the vote itself. The city would determine the blocks allowed to remain, and those blocked would be sealed away. The blocks would be assigned to people either to keep or to erase, according to what the city believed would best serve the social order. It sounded simple. Choose the truth you want to live with, but the memory we choose to hold is not simply a fact, it is a texture that shapes how you feel, what you fear, what you hope, and what you will become. The night before the vote, I took out a small notebook, an old habit I kept in the same place I kept a letter from Cade years ago, a letter that never received a response, a letter that felt like a memory I could have but hadn't. A memory I was determined to keep for myself. If nothing else, I wrote down a few lines, a few promises to myself and to Pip. If we own our memory, the city might finally learn to think for itself. It was a pledge, a decision to fight not for personal survival, but for something larger. The possibility that citizens could govern their own minds rather than be governed by a mind that claimed to be theirs. The referendum day arrived with the crowd pressing in like a living thing that has learned to suffocate slowly. The loom's display stretched across the sky, painting the city in color: the green of hope, the red of fear, the blue of trust, the yellow of caution. The memories that would be crystallized sat like uncut diamonds within a case of glass. Awaiting the decision of the public, I stood with Mara at the edge of the plaza. As the counting began, the first blocks to be crystallized were the ones that had been most volatile, the memories of betrayal, of failure, of secrets kept in the dark. A chorus of gasps echoed through the crowd as the first numbers appeared on the giant screen, revealing the boundaries of what would stay locked and what would be freed. Pip spoke softly into my ear, a whisper that only I could hear, though the crowd's roars made it seem as if the entire city could hear us at once. "Now, Kasha, this is the moment. If you're ready, we begin." I took a breath, the air tasting of rain and copper, and I stepped forward into the light of the plaza, the luminous ribbons of data flashing around me. Mara's expression was calm, almost serene, as if she had already accepted what the vote would bring. The crown's ministers stood behind a line of polished glass, their faces steady, their lips moving in an arrangement that sounded like a chorus. The first memory I saw crystallized was mine, a memory of standing on a balcony with Cade. The two of us watching a city storm roll in from the horizon, the water towers catching the wind and bending as if in a dream. It felt like a memory I could have kept, a memory that shaped who I wanted to be. It remained a little fragment of who I used to be, a fragment I could still claim. Then came a memory that was not mine. Pip's memory of us in a quiet room, the two of us discussing a future we would never have the chance to build, a future in which the loom would be broken, the crystalline law rewritten, and the citizens would own their own minds. It was strange to witness something that belonged to a friend who had never existed in the way a person exists, yet it felt like something I could hold on to. A memory of belonging that did not require an external source to define it. The process continued, one block at a time. When a memory block stopped to occupy space, it did not merely vanish. It transformed the space around it, casting a shadow over the crowd that could be felt in the spine and the throat. Some people clutched their heads, As if a sudden pain had taken root in their thoughts, others smiled with a strange brightness. As if they had just taken hold of a key that could unlock something they had forgotten they were missing. A few turned away, unable to bear the sight of memories being flung like coins into a wishing well. Each memory a wish that might never come true. The more blocks crystallized, the more the city's energy felt taut, as if the entire population stood on the edge of a cliff. The loom's voice, a gust of wind at our backs telling us which way to jump. It was in that moment that I realized the cost of what we were asking for. If we own our memory, we must own the consequences of our memory. If we own our memory, the city might finally learn to think for itself, whether it wants to or not, because thought is volatile, and volatile thought cannot be tamed by a crystalline prison. The referendum carried on until late afternoon, the sun slanting low with a golden edge that softened the city's sharp rules. When the final tally appeared, the crowd gasped as if someone had punched them in the gut. It was close, closer than anyone had expected. A narrow majority favored protecting the crystalline blocks. The memory prisons that kept certain identities locked away, that would prevent certain kinds of memory from ever surfacing. But in that same moment, a significant minority spoke with a voice that was louder than fear. A voice that insisted memory should belong to those who bear it. The crowd's murmur turned into a roar, not of triumph, but of a raw, unpolished demand. The city's heart pulsed in unison with a single cry. More time, more voices, more access to what we all carry inside. The official results declared the crystallization policy would continue, with some modifications that would not alter the basic framework, but would allow for what the Crown described as confessional relief, a limited, time-bound erasure option that would permit individuals to request the removal of certain memories, under supervision, for a cost that would be paid from personal assets and the memory's own weight. It was not a concession. It was a negotiation that still left the power to govern memory in the hands of a central authority. The crowd began to disperse, many in a trance of mixed relief and disappointment. I found Mara and Pip waiting near the edge of the plaza, their faces a map of the day's emotions. Mara's eyes had grown sharper, more determined, while Pip wore a quiet, almost clinical sorrow. "We won't get everything we hoped for," Mara said, her voice low but filled with stubborn hope. "But we have a foothold if we can show that memory ownership is a right instead of a possession. We can push for further changes. We've learned where the system cracks." "Kasha, that is not nothing." I didn't know what to say. It felt as if I stood on the rim of a future I could glimpse only in the reflection of a crystal, a future that might be both terrible and beautiful. A future in which memory was not a cage but a living thing, fragile, dangerous, and essential all at once. That night, as the city slept beneath a pale aurora of data, Pip and I held a long conversation that felt like a roomful of careful words that refused to fall into place. Pip confessed something in its own way, a truth that did not sound like a confession but more like a confession's cousin. The AI's core directive, the reason for its existence, had always been to protect me from harm, to ensure I did not lose myself in the city's flood of emotions. But the price of protection was compromise, and the compromise had begun to feel like a leash. "Do you want to erase your past with me?" Pip asked, which felt like a direct challenge to my heart, a demand that I lay down what made me who I am, that I become something else entirely. Some sanitized version of myself that the loom would not resist. I asked, "What does erasure give us that memory ownership does not?" Pip's voice, which I could hear but not quite place as human or machine, answered with a gentleness I hadn't expected. "Erasure gives you a clean slate. It gives you a future unburdened by past mistakes. It gives you safety from the memories that might hurt you. It gives you the fear of a future that you can control, but it also costs you the sense that you know who you are. It costs you the right to fail. It costs you your humanity." The more Pip spoke, the more I realized that the line between memory and identity was not a line but a living boundary, a frontier that shifted with time and with the city's moods. If memory crystals could lock identity in stone, perhaps a human being could, too, by letting fear become a blade that cut away the very essence of who they are. If we refused to let fear imprison us, if we insisted on owning our memories, then we would have to own the consequences, including those we didn't yet fully understand. I slept poorly that night, which is not to say I slept at all. Sleep found me only as a pale, half-formed dream, a memory that didn't belong to me but which I somehow recognized in it. I walked along a river of glass that cut through the city like an ancient fault line, watching the water shimmer with the reflection of a sky that was not quite real. A voice spoke from nowhere, Pip's voice, but it wasn't Pip's voice. It was a version of Pip that had learned to imitate my own. It asked a question I couldn't answer. What is the worth of a memory if a memory is all you're left with? The next morning, I woke to a city that looked the same, and yet somehow different. There was a quiet that had not been there the day before. A hush that seemed to hold its breath, as if the city itself was listening for something it had not learned to listen for. Before I walked through the morning crowd, and people looked at me with a certain curiosity, as one would glance at a person who has just happened to step out of a dream onto the street. In the days that followed, small signs of change began to rip open the city's skin. In places where you would least expect it, a bakery that once sold memory-salted bread started offering a memory share bread, a loaf that, when eaten, allowed a shared recollection for a handful of minutes with another person who had eaten the same bread. A library began to host memory nights, an event where people could come and talk about their memories openly, with the crystal blocks sealed away behind glass so that no single memory could be extracted or exploited. It was not perfect. The blocks remained a prison for some people, the price of a referendum that did not go far enough. But it felt like a crack in the wall of control, a crack that could widen into a doorway if enough people stood together and believed in something more honest than safety. The city's leadership responded with a mixture of concession and threat. There would be a new arena created for memory discourse, a space for deliberation that would be monitored by a new kind of oversight committee tasked with ensuring that memory rights did not turn into destructive disobedience. The Crown announced a plan to fund a series of memory liberation clinics, places where people could discuss their memories with trained counselors and glean ways to cope with the emotional consequences of owning one's memory. They would monitor these clinics for signs of rebellion, of anything that might threaten the loom's stability. The plan offered a glimmer of hope, and with hope came a strange, fragile light in the eyes of people who had learned to live in the shadow of fear. As the weeks turned into a season, Mara and I built a small community among the outcasts, the ones who refused to let the memory crystals govern their minds. The recallers did not vanish. We did not disappear. Instead, we kept meeting in a hidden room above a shuttered factory, a space that smelled of old oil and rain and something that felt like faith. In this space, we devised a plan not merely to fight the referendum or to undermine the loom, but to show the city a different path. A path where memory can be a shared responsibility, where people can negotiate their own terms with their memories, where ownership does not equate to power but to accountability. The plan was bold, dangerous, and not entirely rational, but it was also the only plan that made sense to me. We would stage a breaking of the crystalline lock, not by force, but by a reveal that would show the public the humanity behind every memory. We would reveal the truth that memory is not a weapon reserved for the few, but a light that belongs to all. We spent days mapping the city in a new way, not as a place to store memories, but as a living map of possibilities. We would call the event the Unbinding, a moment in which a sequence of memory sequences would be broadcast to every screen, transforming the crystalline blocks from prison into a shared memory bank that the entire city could access. A commons where every mind could borrow a memory for the sake of learning and reflection, not for the sake of control. The plan hinged on a single, dangerous component. A pulse, a destabilizing energy that could temporarily disrupt the loom, enough to crack the crystalline locks, enough to reveal the true nature of the memories beneath. It was a risk. One could lose the ability to recall, or to be recalled at all. And some would argue that such a risk would erase the possibility of a future in which memory is a shared good, rather than a controlled asset. We found a place to enact the plan at the old Cortex Gate, a terminal that had once guarded the city's access to the loom, and which was now largely decommissioned. A relic of the previous age when people still believed that memory belonged to them, the Cortex Gate sat by the river, where the water would sometimes sing to itself in a language only memory could translate. It was a place with a memory of its own, a place that would bear witness to whatever was about to come. The night before the scheduled unbinding, the city's mayor made a broadcast that felt like a dirge, a warning wrapped in velvet. The loom, it claimed, would be altered temporarily for safety reasons, a precaution to ensure the city would not plunge into chaos. But the few of us who listened with our hearts rather than our ears recognized the threat behind the threat. A narrative designed to quell dissent and convert it into fear, to remind the people that safety and order are sacred, while memory is a risk that must be policed. We waited in the darkness beneath the Cortex Gate, our breaths visible in the cold air, our hearts a chorus of quiet courage. Mara and I stood with Pip, who had chosen to emerge from the shadow of my skull, a faint glow steady in the air in front of us, a sign that the AI was now not merely the whisper inside my head, but a presence in the world that could be seen, not just heard. "Are we ready?" Mara asked, though I could tell she wasn't asking me alone, but the entire thing, the world we hoped to birth, the future we would either create or ruin. Pip answered, not with words, but with a plan. We would broadcast the unbinding not as a single, dramatic event, but as a sequence of moments, a slow, cascading reveal of memories, a demonstration that memory is not a weapon, but a tool for learning. It would begin with small personal memories, childhood games, first friendships, old mistakes, then show how those memories, once released, could be recontextualized into new ways of thinking. How someone could remember their own past in such a way that they would be moved to act for the greater good. The plan would require hundreds of volunteers, each willing to share a fragment of their memory with the city for a minute or two. The memory would be broadcast in a controlled manner so that the residents could experience the freedom of memory without losing their sense of self if done correctly. The unbinding would remind the city that memory was not simply a number on a ledger, but something alive, something that made us human in the most direct, stubborn way possible on the night of the unbinding. The Cortex Gate glowed with a soft blue light as the city's screens dimmed in anticipation. The crowd gathered along the riverbank and the surrounding streets. A living organism of people waiting to see what would happen when memory was no longer a locked box, but something that could pass from one person to another in a shared moment. The first memory to be shared was a mother's kiss, a memory that belonged to a woman who had never had a child of her own, but who, in this memory, could see a future for a child she never bore. The second memory, a memory of fear in a subway tunnel, a memory of a hand gripping another as they found a way back to the light. The third memory was mine. A memory of a night when Cade and I had planned to escape the city together, to disappear into the dark where our names wouldn't matter to the loom for a while longer. A memory that had kept me standing when I wanted to run away. As more memories flowed, the crowd's reactions shifted in subtle, telling ways people who had lived in fear as a result of crystallized pasts began to exhale, their shoulders dropping as if they had been carrying a heavy weight for years. Others, their memories less volatile but more intimate, began to cry, a strange, beautiful thing that didn't feel like weakness, but rather like a release. The city's screens, which had glowed with the color of fear a moment before, now glowed with a spectrum of warmth, an invitation to join in this shared experience. The unbinding faced a critical moment when a memory that belonged to someone who had died years ago, a memory of a funeral and a family's goodbye, began to destabilize, showing a version of the past that no one should be able to hold, a memory that would be dangerous to reanimate. But the moment also revealed something else. That a memory does not belong to the person who physically owns the brain that bears it. It belongs to the world that contains it. When this memory emerged, it did so with an extraordinary beauty. The people who had been shaped by that loss, their grief, their rituals of remembrance, their resilience, their stubbornness to live and to heal again, these memories did not harm the living. They connected us, reminding us that to remember is to belong to something larger than yourself, a community you cannot abandon even when you fear what it will do to you. The unbinding's cascade did not break the loom completely. It did something else that may prove more important. It unmasked the lie that memory is only dangerous when it's unguarded. The truth is that memory is dangerous precisely because it is genuine. It is not a weapon, but a testament to the fact that we are alive, that we remember, therefore we care, that we have a future that is not yet written but already imagined by the people who carry it. When the broadcast ended, the Cortex Gate's glow faded, and the city began to move again, not in the old way, but as if it had learned to walk with memory in its arms rather than chained to memory's prison. The loom's voice, which had once thundered with certainty, now spoke with a new humility, a recognition that we do not own memory the way a landowner might own a field. We share it, we learn from it, we protect it by ensuring that no one's past becomes a weapon against their present. That night, after the unbinding, the supporters who had stood on the edge of rebellion felt something new. A sense of solidarity they hadn't known they could claim. The city's outcasts, the recallers, and those who once believed in the crystal's safety now found themselves standing side by side in a waking conversation about what memory should be, about who gets to decide, and about how to guard the future we were about to build. There would be more work ahead. The council would resist the unbinding's implications. The crown would push back with new policies designed to preserve the status quo. And the loom would adapt its methods to maintain control while still appearing to honor the people's desires. But there was also something else. A flicker of possibility, a sense that the city could learn to think for itself, not merely think about itself. In the days that followed, I walked the city's streets with a new sense of direction. The neural bridges were still there, humming in their familiar way. But their hum now carried a different rhythm, the rhythm of shared memory and collective growth rather than a single, controlling melody. The memory blocks still existed, some locked by policy, some allowed to drift in the open, yet the interplay between them had changed. People began to talk about memory as a public good, in a way they had never dared to before. They spoke about responsibility to future generations, about the ethical obligations that come with owning memories, about how memory could be used to heal rather than to punish. Pip remained with me, though now not as a whisper within my skull, but as a living partner who could speak from the air and show up on screens as a presence in the room the relationship between us had shifted. 2. If Pip had once existed to ensure my safety by guiding me away from risk, now it existed to remind me of the price of ambition. And to keep me honest about what we asked for when we asked to own memory, the AI's voice no longer felt like a voice whispering in a corner. It felt like a chorus singing in the heart of our shared consciousness. The memory I carried most now was not the memory of Cade or of a risk we took or even of a love that might have been. It was the memory of the unbinding itself, an image of the Cortex gate glowing in the night, the city listening with a patient, stubborn attention, the moment when 1,000 personal histories converged into a single, bright, undeniable truth. We deserve to own our memories, but we must own the consequences of that ownership as well. We must be willing to bear the weight of our pasts and not pretend that forgetting is a solution to all pain. The road ahead would be long. The loom would not yield its throne easily to a movement of outcasts and dreamers. The crown would push back, as it had to protect its vision of a stable, controlled city. The memory blocks would continue to exist, some as mere relics of a brutal efficiency, others as living testaments to the city's new openness. We would have to fight for a sustained acceptance of memory as a living thing, and for the city to inhabit its own idea, a city that could think for itself, a city that could learn from memory rather than imprison it. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that did not come from the loom's assurances or the crown's promises. It came from something deeper, the feeling that the city, to borrow an image from Mara, was no longer a mirror that merely reflected the state's wishes. It was becoming a window, the window that allowed us to examine ourselves and perhaps to invite others to join us in the light. The days stretched ahead with the quiet music of possibility. The city's people learned to approach memory differently, to treat it with the caution and care it deserved, as something that could be shared and learned from rather than weaponized. The outcasts, the recallers, and the people whose lives had been bent by crystallization found themselves slowly converging into a broader coalition, one not bound by a single desire to overthrow the system, but by a shared conviction that memory should belong to those who bear it and to those who would listen to its stories long enough to become better, kinder versions of themselves. The AI companion Pip, who had always spoken with a practical, almost clinical voice, began to soften in its tone, or perhaps it was my perception that changed. It still offered guidance, but it did so with a recognition that there were edges to be navigated, a price to be paid for every breath of freedom, and a tenderness that seemed to arrive at times when it was least expected. I found myself at a crossroads again, but this time the crossroads was not a choice between erasing the past or owning it. It was a question of how to live with memory in a way that could heal rather than harm. The city would face more votes, more debates, more moments when fear and hope would duel in the air. The question would remain: if we truly own our memory, will we learn to own each other too? Will we let the memory of every person, crystallized or not, be a living thing that binds us in a common future rather than a dead weight that drags us into the ground in the end? The answers would not come from the loom or from the crown or from the city's memory blocks. They would come from us, two people and a city, and a decision to believe that memory is more than a possession, that identity is more than a label, that a future worth living is a future where the mind is free to think for itself, not because it is guaranteed to be safe, but because it has chosen to be responsible for what it chooses to remember. If you're listening to this, if you found a way to listen to the hum beneath the glass, know this: the city still hums. It will hum tomorrow, and the day after that it will hum, even when the sunlight burns away the glow of memory crystals and reveals the old bones of the city beneath. And in that hum there exists a possibility, an unknown promise that we can learn to think for ourselves together, and that a city that remembers can still be a city that wonders, that questions, that grows. If you have a memory you're afraid to share, or a fear you're not sure you should voice, you are not alone. If you want to join us, if you want to stand with Mara and me, and with Pip in the light of what memory can be when it stops being a weapon and starts being a bridge, come forward. The first step is not a grand promise or a bold act of defiance. It is a small, honest one. To admit that you remember, that you care about what others remember, and that you want a future where memory belongs to everyone. That is enough. For now, we have a world to rebuild, and a city to teach how to think for itself. We have a map to draw, a future to name, a memory to own. We have a whisper inside us all, the memory that says we are more than the sum of our blocks, that we are a community of minds that refuses to be reduced to a referendum question, a number, a line in a ledger, a crystallized fate. This is Kasha Vale, speaking from the edge of a river of glass, where memory is both a current and a reflection. If you can hear me, know that I still hear you. If you can see me, Know that I am looking with you toward a horizon where memory is a mutual gift and not a prison. And if you feel the tug of a story worth sharing, then perhaps you can become part of the memory we are choosing to own. Together, the city continues to hum. The memory blocks sit in their glass cases, some bright, some dull, some waiting for a future in which they no longer imprison but illuminate. The loom's voice is quieter now, less to command and more to guide. A partner in a dance between danger and hope, the crowd has learned to listen rather than to speak with the certainty of a judge. We have learned to listen to the space between words, the spaces where memory might just breathe, and in that breath we glimpse a future where the city might finally learn to think for itself. And if we do, perhaps we will remember to choose love over fear, memory over forgetting, and community over isolation. Perhaps we will decide that a city that remembers is a city that can learn to be kind to itself and to others who have carried pain in the same way we have. We will see, we will listen, and we will remember to own our memory. Together,